Architects play a vital role in the real estate ecosystem where function meets design. On today's episode of Ask Terra Caribbean, we meet with Stein Carrington about architecture in Trinidad and Tobago. Stein, welcome, man. Welcome to Terra Caribbean. It's a pleasure to have you here with us.
Thank you, JP. It's a pleasure to be here.
Great. I'm excited about our conversation about architecture. And maybe we could start by hearing a little bit about you and about how you got into architecture.
Yeah, well, I mean, for me, it's been a meandering journey. I would say as a company, we started in 2019, but prior to that, my journey was land surveying, where I completed that in 2008, went to Jamaica in 2009, and did a 6-year program. And that 6-year program was a bachelor and a master's. Took me to 2015, worked a little bit at a firm where I got some of my sort of self-tooling and, of course, mentoring and that kind of thing. And then from there, took a leap, in 2019 to start my practice, right? Or design firm, if you want to call it that. There's so many little names for it. Design outfit, right? And we have been, primarily involved in multi-unit residential.
Right, very good.
Since then, and so it's a 3.5-year journey so far for the business and the 2 architects that I have employed with me, so.
Fantastic. It's interesting because when I think of architecture, I think of, fashionable design and how pretty a building may look from outside, but there's so much more to it, isn't it?
Always. I mean, and that's the thing about an architect's qualification through an education and training process, right? Architects would start off with an education process that's going to be about design, history, philosophy, physics, and then that then takes you to another stage where you complete that and then you begin a professional practice. So I'm speaking for the qualified and the registered architects here, that
very good, yeah.
That's the process that you're going to go through in an education, from an education standpoint, and then move to that professional practice and that rigor which is required to then enter the space of work, right? And that's how we create the buildings that we see around us, especially buildings that you can tell of a higher pedigree and higher quality, not just in its finishes, but in how the building works.
Yes. Yeah, so functionality of a building is huge, I've never used an architect personally, and I don't think the majority of Joe Public has, so there's a great opportunity for you all there. But I did do a full house renovation many years ago, and we did it based on how we wanted the house to look, and only after moving in did we realize how important function was and how the property worked, how important that really was.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things that most persons miss is that there's often not a relationship between the average person and the architect, and I think generally that is something that architects have to continue to do, to exhibit their skill and what they can bring to the average client. And out of that, we do understand that it is towards getting a better quality design space. That's ultimately what the goal of the architect. We want to create solutions for anybody's specific problem or challenges.
Yeah, understanding the need of the customer and their personal circumstances, and of course, function to suit, right?
Yeah, and that is so broad spectrum, right? Because it's going to be from the homeowner to the developer who's doing large projects where he's catering for several homeowners, future homeowners, within a single design. And then there's also going to be the larger clients who are going to have commercial spaces that would have their things to be satisfied.
Yes.
And they're going to need space that can be configured for each commercial tenant. And then we have, which we're trying to develop that portfolio now because the company is growing, is the public sector work, So, I mean, we've been part of teams that have done projects for libraries and that type of thing as well. But, in every situation, there's a client. Right?
Yes.
It may be, the homeowner may feel very personally attached to the client, but sometimes it's the particular government official that's attached to that project as a client, So
Interesting, yes.
Or entity, government entity, yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting. And, you know, we've seen a swing towards environmental design in Trinidad, more so on a commercial office side of things. So we're seeing LEED certified buildings. I think we now have 2 in Trinidad. But what are you seeing on the residential side?
That's a good point. So what we'll definitely say is that, and I'm a part of the Green Building Council, the Trinidad and Tobago Green Building Council, and there is a general thrust in trying to make buildings more sustainable. We understand our carbon emissions and trying to get to net zero and those type of global goals, Paris Accord, and you know all the things that resonate with that. And one of the things from the homeowner point of view is that it's often a high cost in the onset. It's even that for the commercial as well.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
But what I would say is that persons can start looking at even going back to some old concepts of using, you know, ceiling fans and rooms that are cooled. There's a word called passive cooling, right, or passive design, and that's a directive by looking at the original concept of designing in tropical climates. And tropical climates occupy so much of the world, right? Mm-hmm. And we're fortunate to be there. And it may be that desire to let fresh air in. And how do you do that and still have a comfortable living space? And it may not be all the time. Sometimes you want to get away from the bugs. Sometimes you want to be a little bit more chilly and that type of thing with your air conditioning. But you want to have a building that is a home that is not burning through electricity bills you know, every month. So passive design is the way.
Passive design, I love that. So like I see a lot of the old school buildings down in Woodbrook and Belmont and so on with the peaked roof, and so the hot air rises and ventilates and the big windows, and
that's
so the traditional way. So what you're saying is incorporate a bit of the traditional ways of architecture to ease on the consumables like electricity, etc.
Correct. And then of course there's new technologies moving forward with plumbing devices that are more adaptable to using less water. There's slightly more complex systems that you can use a grey water system where you can essentially reuse some of the waste and treat it and put it back into your buildings.
Right.
Rainwater collection, depending on the need of the electricity consumption. Persons are using photovoltaic. In the northern Caribbean islands, they've been using solar water heating for years. It's not very common here because our electricity rates have always been relatively tolerable. You know?
Yes. So maybe water is more of a challenge at certain times of year, and we've seen it where buildings collect the storm water to flush the toilets.
Correct.
AC
exactly.
condensate to water plants. And
I think if you look at even the homes in Trinidad that may be more remote in your time of practice, I'm sure you've seen on business, you've seen persons in more remote areas collecting rainwater.
Sure.
And you may say that, you know, the municipal water supply through us or whatever can't get to these locations. And, you know, ultimately that's things that people have been doing for years. It's just when things are not commonplace, it feels very foreign.
Yeah.
But, you know, I think ultimately it's always going to be something that is there to be used. Passive design is always going to be something that you could incorporate.
Yeah, I love that. I love the idea of incorporating the old school ways into the new. You know, but we did an article recently about the new buyer, the demand for the new buyer, what buyers want in this market.
Yes.
And we've seen a lot of demand for smart homes.
Yes.
So I'd be interested to hear from you as to how this affects design.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think one is that you're going to be looking at who's supplying the homes and who's building it, right? So there is the private owner or future owner who's going to come to the architect and say, okay, hey, listen, these are the kind of things I want in my project. And that's very specific. But what is also developing is a lot of where our business is actually growing as well is the multi-unit, where the developer says, we need to meet the market in the same way that the real estate agent is sharing with them This is what my buyers want. And they're the buyers that are young and young at heart, who want all the conveniences from their smartphone, your cell phone, right?
Correct.
And that goes from the electrical, lighting, your electronics, your appliances, and connecting that to security and surveillance. Everything could just be at the palm of your hands, right? And with that, these are the things that we can look at integrating. It may be at a cost, an upfront cost that is of a higher margin, but I think it's things that persons are willing to pay for, especially as economies of scale bring things down and that type of thing. So yeah, definitely, those are the things that we're hearing. I mean, as simple as a USB outlet on a wall socket.
Yes.
Persons want to know that there's that convenience.
Yes.
So
absolutely. So, through our team of 17 agents, we field a lot of requests, right?
Right, yeah.
So we know what the market wants, and we gather information. We've been gathering information on the market for over 20 years.
Yeah.
So we guide developers.
Right.
So developers looking to build something he wants to sell, they need our guidance on what price point, what the customers want.
Yeah.
And that's the symbiosis between us all, right?
Yes,
we're guiding the developers, we're seeing the demand for smart technology. They're gonna build accordingly, and of course implement designers like you to really make it all flow and as it should.
Right, and it is an ecosystem, right? Where there's all the relevant professionals doing their component and their part to ensure that there's a successful project and happy clients for years to come, and resale values, and so those are things that we do understand.
Yeah, absolutely. So I would say that traditionally in Trinidad and Tobago, the culture is go to the hardware, buy some bricks, some cement, and let's build a house, and as we build this house and we live in it and we have children, we'll add on for our children, and that's kind of how it's been.
It is.
I would love to hear from you as to how an architect really adds value to that situation, and why somebody should use an architect, and then maybe your role as it relates to interpreting town and country guidelines and designing accordingly for approvals, etc.
Yeah. Well, I'll take it in two parts, right? The first thing would be the reality that there is a general higher cost of living, right? So the original owners of a property, even if it goes back to a grandparent or parent, that idea of adding on or reconfiguring a residential property is always going to be something that is part of our culture, right? And because of that, we've found that we've had a few projects in that area as well. A person's come and they're like, we want to add on, or we want to provide an additional space. How do we do that? And the key things are often, well, these are the needs. Then what's the budget like? And then can we do this within town and country regulations? Right. Sometimes the home has already exceeded town and country regulations, and sometimes you have to bring it into some kind of level of conformity with that. And that's where we add value. We actually are saying, okay, how could you make something that's going to be fresh and feel like it is going to conform to those needs of the client, and then at the same time knowing that we have to conform to town and country, and then of course the regional corporations, because it's not just town and country planning. It is that town and country presents some written guidelines, and then from those we interpret those guidelines and share it with the client and make sure that the end product, all the way to they getting the building permit to do whatever renovations or new builds that they want to do, is everybody meets, we meet the requirements of everyone. That's essentially what our goal is, and that's a value that, as architects, we probably even don't recognize that we're doing just as a daily activity, but it's that thing that we really think is strong to communicate. And we've had clients from projects where it's, I'm telling you, like 500 square feet additional, 1,000 square foot type projects, all the way up to, okay, I can't even tell you, I can't count, it's the hundreds of thousands in square footage, because we're doing developments as well. And all of it requires that dialogue with the planners at town and country, because we're always trying to understand how do we meet environmental concerns, how do we meet human safety concerns, and we are all living in an economical, financially driven society that we have to conform to the needs and restrictions and that type of thing. So yeah, that's matching the two together. Value all the way to the last thing that you were talking about, with town and country.
Yeah, very good, very good. And you mentioned financing too, and we see it often where the builder or the homeowner would struggle for financing through the banks, right? Because the banks have requirements as it relates to the town and country guidelines, and it needs to be, the buildings need to be built to code to get the completion certificate, to get the final bulk or lump sum of money at the right rate, right?
That's correct, yeah.
So there's bridge financing the whole way through until you get all the WASA approval, the town and country approval, the fire, etc., and the completion certificate from the regional authority.
That's correct.
So I think that's also an area where you guys could add a lot of value by interpreting the guidelines, which sometimes come in code from town and country. That's from a layman's perspective. They say a certain height, a certain amount of units, certain setbacks, certain floor to area ratio. And it's quite complicated, really.
Yeah. I mean, it is, and that's why I'm referring to that same those written guidelines, and that does reflect all the things that you just mentioned. And it depends on the type of use, right? So typically residential properties are going to have setbacks like, that 15 feet from the front, but there are different guidelines based on different scales of buildings. And that's our role, to interpret those things and ensure that ultimately they are approved first at the permit level, which then gives the financial institution that confidence to lend the money,
right?
And then to complete that loan facility, they then require the completion certificate, right? So yes, so that is definitely something that we provide with our group of consultants, because that's another thing that the architect is always going to be doing, especially as they stay through the life of the construction of the project. There's engineers to coordinate, quantity surveyors to ensure that they are quantifying and pricing the exact things that we've designed and with the client and sorted out. And other consultants like the land surveyor. Sometimes we have discussions with the attorneys, because there's essentially the building forms part of a legal document when complete, especially when you're looking at multi-unit projects.
Yes, absolutely. So we advise young families, once you have job security and you're able to borrow from the bank and build property, get into property ownership, right?
Yeah.
But when doing that, I think it's so important that they do it the right way, because it can end badly if you don't dot all your I's, cross all your T's, and you're unable to get that completion certificate at the end of the day. So get the professionals allow the professionals to guide you.
Correct. And I think ultimately one of the important things I would say, and I mean, if anything else, is that you're going to be spending millions. Whether you do it poorly or in a good way, you're going to spend at least 1.5 and 2 and plus millions of dollars.
Correct. Yep.
If you're doing it, you just better you invest that percentage, that lower percentage, likely 10% and less, into good consultancy, good advice through the process, to ensuring that asset is something that we truly appreciate, and that is something that is transferable.
Absolutely.
And that by itself should be reasonable catalyst impetus to take on these endeavors with consultancy.
Very good. Very, very strong points there, Stein. I totally agree with you. And we see it quite often where properties may be built substandard and the homeowner pays for it in the long run, where they're unable to sell, they may have to take less. So had they done the right thing from the start, we are much more confident in the resale of that property. Yeah. So, Stein, thanks again, man, for coming in to meet with us. It's really a pleasure having you.
Thank you for having me. I mean, it was good. It's definitely an enjoyable experience, and I'm hoping that I was able to add some form of value to the listeners and the viewers.
Absolutely, and we'll work together in the future, I'm sure. Thanks again.
Of course, thank you.